story, couple of seconds. And cool, I think we're good. So Dark Bleatings, everyone. We are here with another author/creator interview, I want to say. This is Mark Morris, and I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with either Mark's own fiction or his anthologies that he edits. And I have a short little stack here, Mark, that I want to talk to you about. Right. But firstly, yes, welcome and thank you for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Sorry to interrupt you already.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I just saying I'm very honoured to be here.
I'm really, really excited to get to speak to you. I think that we met once briefly. I think Tim Leben introduced us.
We did, yeah.
And then you were on my list of authors that I wanted to read for the longest time, but I have an eternal TBR, so it always takes me forever to get around. But then, luckily for me, I received a nice little pile of books over the last few months, and I'm never looking back now.
Oh, brilliant.
I've added so much of your work to my list of things to read. I'm doing a reading challenge at the moment, so I have a pile of your stuff on there. So if we start with your own fiction, so this is the most recent, I believe, That Which Stands Outside.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
Would you like to tell people a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's basically it's I guess a folk horror novel. I mean, it's a bit of a buzz thing to say it's a folk horror novel, but it's set on a small kind of Nordic island, which is somewhere near Iceland. It's never kind of explained exactly where it is, and it has its own culture, which is an amalgamation of different cultures from different parts of kind of Scandinavia, I guess, the kind of Nordic culture, and it's about it's a kind of a fish out of water novel more than anything. There's two main characters. The main character, the English character, is a guy called Todd, and he's a kind of jobbing actor, works in a coffee shop or a bar, and he meets a girl one night. He saves her from a mugging, basically. And it turns out that she's from this little island. They form a relationship. She's from this little island. She then gets news that her mother has died, and she's kind of estranged from her family, from her mother. But she has to go back to the island to kind of sort out her mother's affairs. So and she's reluctant to do so. And Todd says, "Okay, well, I'll come with you. I'll come with you." And they get to the island, and strange things start to happen. It's obvious she's not very welcome there, and she's not. And Todd's not quite sure why. He's kind of learns a little bit as bits and bobs as it goes along. But it's very much a case of he doesn't know the language, he doesn't know the culture, he doesn't know the customs. So hopefully that gives the reader this kind of unsettling feeling that, like Todd, they don't quite know what's going on. And things slowly escalate as things, as time goes on.
Yeah, it was so. I feel like the sort of opening sections of the book where we're being introduced to everyone really upped the ante on the idea of like hooking the reader, because there are like 1,000 hooks. I was so invested straight away, because firstly, I think that as I'm an indie author, sort of. I still consider myself like aspiring author, and I think that anyone that does anything creative, whether it's acting or anything else, would relate to Todd, and like that kind of limbo feeling, like where you're still working towards something and you're not quite where you want to be. And then when he meets this woman, before he even goes to the island with her, there's a bit of a hint of other people in his life aren't so sure about her. Yeah. But you don't know if they're just being judgmental or like what's going on there. And I just loved that when we got to this island, that it was very apparent immediately that people were giving her a really wide berth. And I was like, oh my God. So it was like fish out of water, but twice, because he's in a new environment, but a new environment where he doesn't speak the language and he doesn't know her history with the town and the locals. I also, without spoiling anything as well, I thought that this was going to be sort of a fairly standard folk horror as I was going in, and I was up for it because this is one of my favorite genres.
Yeah.
But you just did something so different from what we're used to reading, I think.
Right.
Where did you get did you use real Nordic folklore, or did you like sort of borrow bits and then create your own? Because I don't know about this side of the
Yeah.
well.
I did a lot of research, and then I kind of used information that I'd found and created my own sort of version of it, if you like, because there's no hard and fast rules to it. Without wanting to give too much away, and I can tell you're not wanting to give too much away, but there's a creature that's mentioned in there that's quite prominent, and if you read into it, there are lots of different versions of that creature. Some people think, it has different qualities and it looks different to what other cultures think. So I wanted to just create my own kind of version of it, if that makes sense. And the reason this whole thing came about was because I was actually asked to do an audio drama by a company that I work with quite a lot called Bafflegab, who now do the Uncanny podcast, and so they've become very well known for doing the Uncanny podcast. But they were doing a lot of audio dramas, and I'd worked for them a few times. And I was told that they'd got, without kind of giving too much away, but I was told that they got the rights to a script that was never produced by a very famous kind of scriptwriter and director. And that scriptwriter and director subsequently died. But, would I be interested in looking at it? But I was told that it was very rough and ready and all over the place, and a lot of the story didn't make sense, and it wasn't properly finished and all this kind of thing. So I said, yeah, I'll have a look at it. I'll see if see what we can do with it. So I looked at it, and to be honest, the script was unworkable. It was terrible. It was all over the place, absolutely all over the place. And so I said, I can look at this, and I can kind of take possibly the core element of it and maybe the location and try and do something with it. So I kind of worked on it and came up with something which was very, very, very different to the original script, but had the kind of hopefully I felt as though it retained the spirit of it and had the kind of core elements. And then the son of the writer said he really, really liked it, but it was so different to his father's original work and concept that he honestly couldn't okay it. He couldn't say, go ahead and do this under this same title. So I said, and I said to Simon Barnard, who's the kind of head of Bafflegab, I said, look, I'm not sure if he'll go for this because it is so far removed from his dad's original vision. But I liked my storyline so much and what I'd come up with and all the research I'd done, that I said, if he doesn't want it, I'm just going to take it and get rid of all the other little elements that were his and work it in and as a novel. So that's what I did. That's what ultimately happened. So it kind of came from that original concept of him, and the only things that are the same are it had a kind of a Nordic folklore element, but my Nordic folklore element was way, way different to his. He was using like Odin and all the the usual kind of stuff, and it takes place on an island. But in his case, it was weirdly, although it had a lot of Nordic folklore, it was set on a Scottish island. Whereas mine, I just thought, well, just set it on a Nordic island, So it's a very those are the only elements that remain the same. The rest of it is completely different.
Such an interesting sort of conception story for the book, and because it had a journey to get to the finished product. I loved the island setting because I'm so curious about Nordic countries and culture and things, but I've never been anyway, and I felt like I could see it here, albeit this is a particularly strange island as it turns out. But I thought the folk horror elements as you were weaving them in felt familiar, but then I was like, oh no, there's something something's amiss out of like what's, you know, more than what's normally amiss with folk horror. And yeah, I was so delighted and surprised when we get to like what the thing is, because it's usually I guess it's usually a god of some description and people worshipping a god, and that's, I always really enjoy that, but they were so much extra to enjoy here. I would put this in a bracket of I always like to say who I'm recommending books to, which kind of readers I think would really most enjoy work when I read it, and I think folk horror fans definitely. Anyone who enjoys a fish out of water story definitely, and then also people who like creature features.
Yeah.
And people who like, you know, historical fiction to an extent as well, because there's a lot of local legend built into this in the setting. So yeah, I had such a great time with it, and it was one of the more unique books that I read last year for sure. So yeah, so I'm highly recommending this to everybody. I think horror fans would really love it.
Yeah, thank you. It does have as well a very subtle tiny kiss to Lovecraft. I just wanted to give it a tiny little Lovecraftian feel, but not have it as, you know, regarded as a Lovecraftian novel, but just have that little kind of that kind of feeling that he evokes sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That unsettling kind of, oh my God, there's something really almost like this feeling of awe, but fear.
Yeah, I was getting really creeped out because I was reading it in the nighttime when it's, you know, spooky. That's when I like to read my horror, and I was sitting with my husband as I was reading it, and he was gaming, and I was like, oh, you won't believe. So I was just like updating him on bits as I was coming across, and the final act, I just felt very tense.
Yeah.
I didn't know which way you were going to go, because I was like, you could wrap this all up nicely, give it a nice happy ending, or you could absolutely tank everything and you know, leave us with something that feels like The Mist, the end of the film version.
I wasn't quite sure where it was going to go, to be honest. I was kind of trying to leave it as open as possible. I thought I knew roughly the direction that it was going to go, but I didn't know how it was going to end.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to end it when it feels right.
Yeah, I feel like it reached its most logical, natural conclusion in very horrific ways. Is there? I know there is going to be a difference, but the process of writing a short story as opposed to something this, because this is novel length, but this is, well, no, it's about the same page count, but it looks beefier than your standard novel. Do you have a different sort of process when you're putting your narratives together, depending on the length of the story? Or like, do you always know, as opposed to a novella or a short?
Yes. Sorry, you froze very slightly there, so I missed the middle of what you said.
Oh, sorry. I was asking if you have a difference with where you're putting the narrative together, depending on length of story, and if you always know roughly if it's going to be a novella or a short, or a novella or a novel.
Not always. Only in the sense that I think I've got a bit of an instinctive feeling for it over having done it for such a long time. Obviously, I always know, you know, if someone asks me for a short story, then I always come up with a short story idea, which I always think of is just one very central idea, and you kind of follow that through. I never quite know how long it's going to be. If somebody says, "Can you do me 4,000 words with a short story?" I'm never great at judging the length of short stories. I always think, yeah, this is a 4,000 word idea, and then suddenly I find I've written 10,000 words. Whereas I'm much better at doing it with novels, and especially because I do a lot of tie-in work. And they're very specific with their word count. So I mean, there was one time when I wrote a novelization of a movie called it was Noah. That I wrote the novelization of Noah, and I think it had to be either 70,000 or 80,000 words. And I kind of have this feeling of how long it should be at a certain point, and you know, and just instinctively now I'm going to hit it within like 5,000 words either way. And weirdly, when I finished that manuscript, not intentionally, but I finished the manuscript dead on 80,000 words. I mean, it was actually 80,000 words or 70,000, whatever it was. And I thought, and it wasn't like I'll just try and cater this so that it's exactly. I was just writing it thinking, oh, I think I'm going to hit this quite pretty close here, and finished it, and then did the word count, and it was 80,000 words. I mean, it did then get changed and edited and stuff. So but with novel, I mean, with novels, I'm always all I will say with constructing them is that a novel is a short story is usually just one central idea that you kind of follow through, and it has to be kind of quite lean. You know, you can't go off on too many tangents, have too many characters, all that kind of thing. A novella is just a bit more developed than that. It might have a few little ideas in there and a little bit of journey for the characters or whatever. And then a novel I usually find is like lots of ideas coming together. So there's lots of things I want to incorporate. So I thought I want to write a fish out of water story. I want to write a story about somebody who's somewhere where he doesn't know what's going on, even to the extent that he didn't understand the language. I wanted to incorporate all these different kind of Nordic folklore elements. There were certain characters I thought about. The location is always a big thing. The weather's always a big thing, and it's just, so it's a lot of that all kind of comes together in, so there's lots and lots of different ideas. I kind of think about different relationships that people have got. I was thinking about Ursa, who's the female character, her family relationships, and all those kinds of things. I was kind of thinking about all that stuff, which is something you don't get the chance to think about quite so much in short stories. You have to get that over very, very snappily, very quickly.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Well, I'm going to ask you. I personally struggle with the middle if I'm writing longer fiction, which is why I have yet to release a novel, because I feel like I'm strong in my opener and I know where I'm going to go in the end, and then the sort of second act, if you will, I'm a bit like, oh, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here. But I thought that your middle section was really strong, because that's where I feel like you were really bringing in those location elements with the cave and stuff, and then the relationships with the people in the town and everything as well. Do you plot?
Yeah, I do. Some people don't, but I always do, and a lot of the reason is because I tend to write novels with quite a lot of characters. So I feel as though I have to kind of work out where they all are at certain times and what's going on. And I just feel much more comfortable if I kind of plot the course of the book. Sometimes it goes off in different tangents. I mean, I will tend to do about a 40-page plan, and it's literally like chapter by chapter, but it's just kind of quite sketchy in each chapter. Like just sort of says who's got to be where, or this is the funeral scene, whatever it might be. And then sometimes I will get to that point in the story and think, actually, this is irrelevant. I don't need this. This has already been covered before. I don't need this meeting between these people because they've already talked about this. And so I'll make little jumps and little changes, or I'll realize that the timelines are out or something. So I need to move things around a bit. But I do have like a pretty good solid basis for what I'm going to write. And I usually have an ending. It's not always the ending that it ends up being, but I always like to have something in place so that I think I know where it's. I don't want to get to a point and think I have no idea where this is going to go now or what I'm supposed to do with it. I know there are some friends of mine, some writers who I know who don't plot at all, because they say if they knew what was going to happen, they would get bored and they wouldn't want to write it. Like Ramsey, Ramsey doesn't really plot, and Michael Marshall Smith. Yeah, they just don't plan. They just write. I just couldn't do that. I tried it once and I got into massive tangles with my story and had to go back and just unpick it all and just start again.
I think I'm going to have to plot for longer work. I'm quite the pantser with a short story, but I get like an idea for a short story and I've got the whole story, and it's not much of a time commitment. And if you mess something up, it's not very far back word count wise. But I wrote a novel during lockdown, and then when I went back and read it, I was like, oh, I feel like I should have made notes. I had threads in there that I completely forgot about, because by the time, because it takes months or even years. So by the time it's like 6 months later, you're not going to just remember what you did in chapter 2. And that one was such a mess, and I was like, I don't think it's fixable. I'm going to just deem it a practice run and move on to something else. So yeah, maybe I'll yeah, I think that's quite good advice for people who are struggling like me to put something longer together, Mark. Maybe I'll try and do a chapter breakdown and plan it out.
The thing is, as well, I'm usually working because I have to make a living out of it. I don't have another job. This is how I make a living. So I can't afford to like go off for weeks on a tangent and then realize that it's not making sense and I need to start again. I just can't. I have to kind of know where I'm going and that everything has to, be moving along.
Yeah, I think that people think that if people are full-time writers, that takes an element of like sort of stress away. But if you're constantly on the clock, and I always talk to Tim Lebbon about this, but every time he does a talk in public, he's like, well, the pros and cons. Yeah. You're constantly one mistake away from being dropped. Yeah. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, this is another thing I wanted to say about this book. I thought that your incorporation of the weather was amazing, because I think that's something that's neglected in a lot of stories. I think you'll know that there's a storm or something, but you're told it, and then
and then it's not given. Yeah,
it moves on.
Yeah,
it's the weather was almost like another character.
Yeah, the weather and seasons are really important to me. I always have to know what season, even if it's a short story, I always like to know what season it's taking place. And I do tend to push towards the autumn a lot, because I just find that the most evocative season. But I have set things in other seasons as well. And I love the weather. I read, like, my first novel, Toady, was set in a seaside town, but I decided to set in a seaside town in the winter. And the reason that I did that was because it suddenly occurred to me that I'd never seen snow on a beach, and I thought, what is it if it's like thick snow covering the sand and the tide's coming in and it's eroding the snow? And it suddenly struck what a really evocative image that was. I'm not sure if I even have that image. I might have it in the book. It's a long time since I've looked at it. I don't know. But it was kind of that image that set it off. And I just thought, oh yeah, seaside town. But a seaside town in the winter when everything's closed up and it's cold and bleak and dark, and so it is very much a case of the location and the season, or the weather is always like a character.
Yeah. I think it's important, and it really helps with atmosphere, because I don't think that anyone ever pictures snow on a beach. If you say beach or seaside, people automatically picture sunshine, blue sea, even if you're in the UK and our seas aren't very blue. But that's the image. I really enjoyed the weather elements, because especially anything with rain and stuff, because it really makes a difference if someone's outside and it's pouring down. You can't hear anything because it's windy, and really added to the atmosphere. I have to ask you about editing, because I'm going to say it now. I personally think that you are the best anthology editor currently working in horror.
Thank you. That's a great compliment. Thank you.
And I started really noticing editors a few years ago. I say a few years ago. It was when I discovered anything edited Stephen Jones, and I was like, oh wow, these anthologies are always great. Yeah. Like, I never pick up a Stephen Jones anthology and think, mediocre. So I have read these two that you worked with Flame Tree Press for, and this one is my personal favorite, Elemental Forces, and I talked about it so much towards the end of last year because it contains my favorite overall story of last year.
Oh, Sarah Langan.
Oh God, she's scary. Such a great closing story for the anthology, and I've been telling everyone about it because I don't often actually feel scared when I'm reading horror. I'm probably a bit desensitized now, but something about that one got me. And yeah, that story for me even came above, All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Neville and like the other novels that I was reading that I thought, well, nothing's going to top this. And then I read this in December, I think, or November, and I was like, oh.
Has Sarah been in touch, Kaylee, with you at all?
I did message her when right after I read her story. I messaged her to tell me that she was going to give me nightmares. And I do need to reach out to her again because I have an award for her for the best story of the year. Yeah, I think this is something I like to draw more attention to when people are reading anthologies, because I've been guilty of this as well. When people review anthologies or when they talk about them, they always neglect to mention the editor and the way the stories have been put together and which stories were chosen. And I think you've assembled just like a superstar cast of authors in both of these. This was not very far behind for enjoyment for me. I think it was Sarah's story that tipped this one overall. How do you go about, first of all, I know these are you're theming these with the alphabet, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, they're not exactly themed. It's just a way of doing a series without it being like the fifth book of, because it used to be the case that you used to be able to just go into a bookshop and you'd have a selection of books. Say it was the Pan Horror series or something. You could just go along and choose like, oh, I'll buy number 7 and number 22 or whatever. But bookshops don't tend to like that nowadays because they claim that readers have changed, and if they go to a bookshop and see, the 22nd Pan Book of Horror Stories, they'll immediately think, oh, I haven't got the others, so I'm not going to buy number 22.
Oh.
Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but apparently that's why you never kind of tend to see so much like anthology series that are numbered anymore. So that's how we avoided it. So it was just by doing it alphabetically, thought, well, each one will seem like a one-off. But for those in the know who are collecting the series, they will know that it's just a kind of alphabetical thing.
Yeah, I like the way you're doing it because it does make them very collectible, I have to say. And off the basis of how strong even just one of them were, I'd confidently put my money into all the rest because I trust that they're going to be great reads. I think this is my favorite anthology that I've ever read, and I read so many because I love them, and I've always bought anthologies, and I've never. Maybe I guess there must be some statistical backing for the claim that people don't read short stories compared to novels, but I always have. And then obviously because of the website, I'm sent a lot of anthologies as well, so I'm constantly reading them. But I'm so obsessed with it. When you were putting it together, did you have an idea of which authors you wanted to invite to submit, or how do you go about it? Do you open submissions for a few slots, or is it all invite only?
It's a big juggling act, actually. It's I have there's 20 stories in each volume. That's that's what we decided. There's going to be 20 stories in each volume, and 16 of them I commission. And then 4 are chosen. They have an open submissions window 2 weeks a year from Halloween for 2 weeks. Flame Tree, and people are invited just to submit stories. Have this open submissions window, and at each open submissions window, they usually get around 1,000 stories. That's the kind of the general. It's around about 1,000 stories that come in, and I choose 4 out of those, but I don't read all 1,000. They go into Flame Tree. Flame Tree have a team of readers who sift through them, who read them, and they basically kind of make shortlists, and then a shorter shortlist, and the shorter shortlist, and then I end up getting usually about 30 stories from Flame Tree. They send me what they think are the 30 best stories, and I read those, and if there are 4 that are great in that 30, I'll choose those 4. But Usually there aren't. Usually there aren't, because what they think are the greatest stories that are not necessarily what I think are the main great stories. So sometimes I'll only maybe think like a couple out of that 30, and then I'll say to them, okay, I've got 2 out of this, can you send me another 20? And then they'll send another 20. So it sifts down. But sometimes what they think are lesser stories, I think are much better, great stories. But with the commissioning thing, what I always try and do is try and get a mixture of like new writers who are like exciting new writers that I personally like. Try to read as much new kind of fiction as possible. And I have a bunch of books now by writers who I've never read before, but that people are kind of praising and they're talking up their work and stuff. So I've got some books to read, and I'll just jot down a list, and I've tried to get as many newish, i.e. new to the series writers as possible. I don't want to kind of just keep rehashing the same writers, but there are certain writers whose work I really love. So, if they haven't written for 2 or 3 anything for me for 2 or 3 volumes, I'll maybe ask them again. And also, you have to get things like think about things like gender parity and all those different elements and the kind of things that people write. You don't want a bunch of like extreme horror writers, or you want kind of different sorts of and that kind of thing. So I always just try to make a list of what I think is a good kind of varied assortment of younger and older writers, male and female writers based in different parts of the world, so you get a kind of different approach. Just all those things come into play, really.
I think that's why this is so strong, because there's so much variety, and when you've got a wider variety of authors with different backgrounds and life experiences, you're going to get a wider variety of storytelling types and subgenres and what they're doing and everything. Because I was so happy. So you've got, Pop Easy Bright's been going a while, more extreme side of horror normally. You've got Tim Leben has been going for decades. So I'm a big I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, I'm a huge Tim Leben fan.
I've never noticed that.
I've never really mentioned it before.
Mentioning more.
And then you've got Annie Knox. I was delighted to see, because
that was an uncommissioned one. She came through the slush pile, if you want to call it slush pile. I just really liked her story.
Yeah, I only recently found Annie Knox about a year and a half ago, I think, and I think she's really good. And so, but she's really new in terms of publishing, I think. So I know I'm seeing Annie Knox coming up over and over in anthologies now, and I'm not surprised. But it was just such a great, there's such a great mix of authors in here. Like a lot of them I have heard of and I've read before, and then a lot of them were completely new to me. And I always love to find new authors this way. So I'd never read any Sarah Langan, and then felt really stupid for that when I Googled her after going to have to read everything Sarah Langan now. But
there's always people to discover. There's people that I haven't read that I really want to read, that have been going for years. I've had books for years that I just haven't got around to reading yet.
I know. I've only just started in recent years reading Clive Barker, and everyone's always telling me off, and they're like, "How can you have not read Clive Barker?" I'm like, "There's a lot of authors."
Exactly, there are.
When you're deciding which order to put the stories in as well, because I don't think that the importance of the running order can be overstated in terms of because you want to keep people interested, so you've got to make sure you're not putting stories that are similar together, although there aren't really any similar to each other stories here. So what are your thoughts when you're deciding what to put at the front and end of the book?
You always want to start and end really strongly. Obviously, it sounds like an obvious thing to say. I tend to find that I don't know if this is deliberate, but I tend to find that I kind of have usually quite a longish story at the end. Feels like a good solid kind of thing to end with, like a good meaty strong story. And it's just To be honest, I mean, a lot of it you're relying on the writers. You're relying on the writers to deliver. So it is a case of like, I'm usually really tense because I'm thinking, oh, are they all going to deliver? And obviously, you know, you don't tend to get many stories like months in advance. So you don't have the luxury of reading a story and saying to a writer, you know what, I don't think this is quite up to your usual standard. Could you write me something else? Because quite often what happens is they have a deadline 31st of January and the story comes in 3 days before the deadline. You're just kind of hoping that the story is going to be strong enough. And I've been very lucky in that I always try to choose writers that I know I can pretty much rely on, or that I really like their work enough that I think I'm sure they'll do something good. And there's only 2 occasions, and obviously I'm not going to name names, but there's been 2 occasions when commissioned writers have delivered a story and I've just thought, I just don't like this. I just can't take this. I don't think it's good enough. But luckily in both cases, they've submitted their stories a few months in advance of the deadline. You know, those have been situations where they've done that. So I've been able to go back to them and say, just be honest and say, I'm sorry, I just don't think this, I think you can do better than this. And both times, luckily, they haven't thrown a hissy fit or anything. They've both said, no worries, I'll write you something else. And they've written the second story, and the second story has been great. So so a lot of it is yeah, I'm on kind of tender hooks thinking, I hope the stories I get are going to be good, because it you know, rises and falls with that. And then after that, it's just a case of looking at as you say, like the tones of stories, what the stories are actually about, the lengths of the stories as well. So you don't want like a bunch of long stories together or very short stories together. Just getting a nice mix of writers. So you know, I talked about gender parity. So you have to think about, don't have all the female writers together and then all the male writers together. You kind of have to mix that up a little bit as well. So it is just it's lots and lots of different elements that you have to think about, and it's just a case of one story complementing the next. I've talked to Steve Jones a lot about this, and because we both hate these anthologies where you have stories that are alphabetical by author or something, because I just think, it's just so random, and it just feels like, you know, it just feels and just doesn't feel right. So we always talk about having to actually curate an anthology. So it's a case of getting everything so that each story shines where it is, because it's either very different to the story that's gone before, or, you know, whatever it might be, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I found this very Moorish, because usually when I read an anthology, I sort of I always read them in the order that they're put in the book, because I know that's intentional 9 times out of 10. But I don't normally feel the need to sit and read an anthology cover to cover, but I think I did this one in 2 sittings. Because I was like, oh, well, that was great. What's next? Oh, that was great. What's next? I have learned from being on the editing side, which is very new to me, of an anthology, several things. One is, never take it personally again if you don't get into an anthology.
Yeah.
Because we had 300 submissions for the latest anthology that I worked on. We had some invited authors, but then we had 304 places. And I can't imagine reading over 1,000 as the Flame Tree have to, because that was a lot. And I found that the more annoying thing for me was that we were getting quite a lot of really good ones that I wanted to put in the book, and I was like, I wish half of these at least were rubbish, so I could just easily.
I know what you mean. I tend to find when I read through the stuff that Flame Tree send me, is that they're either well written but very cliched, and I can kind of guess where the story's going, or they've got a nice central idea, but they're just not very well written or very well, you know. And so you kind of have to get the 2 things. They have to be well written and well paced and all that, but they also have to have a really good, strong, original idea.
Yeah, I found, well, we did a werewolf themed anthology, and we asked people, like, give us something a bit different though. Yeah. And then I think my biggest frustration when I was reading the submissions was, because I really enjoyed most of the stories, but we had so many really, really well written werewolf stories, but the twist at the end was that it was a werewolf, and I was like, but it's a werewolf anthology, everyone knows. And then there was balancing things against the stories that the invited authors had written as well, because you don't want anything similar. So we had to reject a few that were really good, but they were just really similar to something that was already definitely in the book. So it's
it's things like when sometimes I get stories. I'm always glad when I get stories that are different. That there's no like. Luckily, so far, I haven't had like two stories that have been so similar that you think, oh gosh, this is a bit tricky. But you do sometimes get something like, I don't know, a couple of stories that are set in railway stations, for instance, or they might have a similar location or something like that. So then there might be very different stories, but because the say the locations are similar, I kind of have to keep those stories apart so that people don't notice. You don't suddenly want like two stories set in railway stations really close to each other, because then it'll start to click with people. So it's like little things like that where you have to keep certain elements of different stories apart, even if the story itself is different.
Yeah, we had only one went into the book, but in the submission pile we had quite a lot of takes on Red Riding Hood, and they were all completely different takes.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, we can't put more than one in because no Three Little Pigs though.
Oh, okay.
I thought we might get like a Three Little Pigs story, but no. Do you find so? I'm really interested in dealing with in asking you about so because you're an author as well, and because you're editing, which means most likely having to reject stories by people that you know.
Yeah, occasionally.
Did you ever worry? I think most people can accept a rejection and it's fine and there's professionalism, but did you ever worry that was somehow going to have some sort of knock-on effect to how people are viewing your own fiction? Like maybe people will be harsher with your fiction if you've rejected someone or anything like that.
You have to try not to think that too much. Yeah, you try not to have to overthink that, really. You just have to be true to yourself. I've always just tried to be true about these things, even when people send me stories that they just want me to comment on, because I used to do an editorial service, and quite often it would be sometimes it would be people that I knew, or the people that were friends on Facebook or whatever. And I realized very early on, and that's, I always say this up front, that I will be honest. I will be completely honest with you about it. And I'll always try and do things in a pleasant way. I'll just sort of say, I'll just honestly, just didn't kind of work for me, and we'll try to explain why it didn't work. And I don't kind of think, oh, so and so edits anthologies, so maybe I should choose his story so that he will look favorably on my. And I never think that. I always just try to be as professional as possible.
I think if it's always about the work, it's because it's not about the author. I've had people say to me a bunch of times that because I'm writing, I shouldn't be reviewing books, and I never, well, I don't know if I should or shouldn't, but I'm doing it anyway because I'm an avid reader, so I feel like I can, and I mostly talk about books I love. I don't tend to make top 10 worst books lists or anything like that, but I hadn't really thought about it, but I have it said to me quite often as well, aren't you worried that if you give someone a bad review, then they're going to go give your book a bad review? And I'm like, no,
that's slightly different, because you're putting your view out there to the public, aren't you? You're putting it out in a public domain, whereas I'm only kind of interacting one-on-one with them, so I'm not kind of telling other people, oh, so-and-so sent me and it was rubbish. Because I did used to review books. I used to review books for Interzone and for a magazine called Million, and I did get a little bit. There were times when I thought, oh, I know this writer, I know him really well, but I don't like their book very much. So I found that I was maybe giving them a slightly better review than I would have done if I didn't know who they were. So that's why I stopped doing it. And I was confronted on one occasion, not by the author, but by the author's friend. And for giving the book a poor review, and this is why like on I don't know if you'll have noticed, but like because I always put what I'm reading on Facebook, this like books read kind of thing, because it kind of generates, you know, nice bit of discussion and stuff. And I'm always interested in what other people are reading. But if you notice that if anybody ever says to me, "What did you think of it?" I'll never answer their question. I will never say because I just think I don't want to go there. You know, I'm not, even if I liked it, it's either you absolutely love it or you don't say anything. So if I absolutely love a book and somebody says, "What do you think of it?" I'll say, "Oh, it was brilliant. I really, really loved it. It was fantastic." You know, where if they asked me that question and I didn't 100% love it, even if I quite liked it, but it, you know, I'll just ignore the question. I won't answer it.
It can be awkward, especially if you go to events and you get used to seeing your sort of like writer pals in person as well, because like they're your friends, so it is awkward. But I struggled with it a little bit in the beginning if I got something, and I just thought, as long as if I'm going to be critical, as long as I'm fair, and hopefully people won't fall out with me about it, but if they do, they literally asked for the review. So I do struggle with it a little bit because I'm also kind of an eternal people pleaser. I do not like saying that I didn't like this book, but I tend to just not talk about the books that I really didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, and even if it's an author that you absolutely love, there are going to be occasional books that you think are not up to the standard of what they usually do. Not that they'll be bad books, but you're going to think, I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as their previous book, or I didn't like it as much as so and so, because you're not going to love every single book 100% that they, you know, that they do.
Yeah. I'm a bit more comfortable with saying it if it's say it's a Stephen King book, because the odds that Stephen King is going to even see my comment, and even if he did, I don't think he's going to like, he's doing fine. I don't think that my thoughts on Billy Summers are going to affect his sales. So I try to be a little bit more diplomatic if it's a self-published author or something, because, you know, I can't remember who said it, but someone said indie authors do not need help not selling books.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's hard enough anyway. So I tend to really hype up the ones that I really sincerely loved, and then it's a balancing act. But yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that being on the editing side. And I suppose I do always hope that I love a book. If it's someone that I know personally has sent me one, I think, oh my god, please.
It is tricky though, because if you only focus on the books that you love, you then get this reputation of people saying, "Oh, you just like everything, so therefore your opinion is worthless because you just love everything anyway." Do you know what I mean? So you have to have that kind of balance a little bit.
Yeah, I've actually written a few more critical reviews that are scheduled for this year already, because that was a criticism I had a lot last year. So like, yeah, but you just like everything. So I was like, oh, I don't.
People accuse me of that because, you know, I only highlight things that I like on social media. Kind of mention, usually, occasionally I won't, but most of the time I only highlight things that I really enjoyed, because I don't see the point of saying, "Oh, you know, I really hated this. I'm going to kind of say how much I hated something on social media," because I think, you know, what value is that to anybody really?
There's enough negative stuff on the internet. That's what I always think. I'm not going to add negative stuff to Facebook. Do you have a favorite thing between editing and writing, or are they?
No, I like just not really. I love the variety of what I do. So I love the editing. I love writing novels. I love writing short stories. I love doing tie-in work, you know, and I like jumping about between one thing and another because it's all different disciplines. And I just like the variety of doing it. I don't think I would want to just like constantly doing the same thing over and over again. So yeah, no, not really. The only time is if it'll sometimes comes in all at once, and then I'm like, oh my god, I've got to jump from this to this to this to this. And there have been times when I've been like editing the anthology, and I've got, you know, a novel to deliver, and I've got a short story to write, and I'm just trying to break up my day into chunks so that I try and do a bit of everything, and then it's like spinning plates. And then it gets hard work. But most of the time, I just like the variety of moving from one thing to another.
Does being on the editing side inform your own writing at all? Has anything changed about how you approach your own writing?
I think I'm quite good at compartmentalizing things, so not really. I'm usually quite aware of. I mean, the commission writers that I get for the anthologies, I'm very aware of what their work is like anyway. So it's not that it kind of affects me. And I know some writers won't read anything. They won't read other people's work while they're writing because they think it's going to affect their own work and influence their own work.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had that. I mean, obviously, I have writers who are influencers on me,
Mm-hmm.
Whose work has influenced me and inspired me and all that kind of thing. But I never kind of, like some people take on, if they're talking to somebody, they'll take on their accent a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think some writers think that if they're reading something by somebody, they'll start to take on their style a little bit. I feel as though I'm kind of confident enough in the way I write now, having done it for such a long time, that won't really affect me. So no, I am very good at compartmentalizing one thing and another. I do read a lot of stuff that like really inspires me and like fires me up and think, makes me write better. But I don't kind of copy other writers' stuff, if that makes sense.
I don't intentionally copy other writers, but sometimes I'll be midway through a draft or something and go, wait a minute. I think I've read this. Like the idea or or a chapter or something, like, wait a second, I thought I thought of that myself, but I think I might have read it 12 years ago somewhere and it's been buried at the back of my brain.
Ideas are the hardest part of the process. Coming up with, like, original ideas, coming up with ideas, because I've read so much over many years, and so just every time I come up with an idea, you come up with an idea and you kind of roll with it for a bit and think, oh yeah, I like that idea, that's really good. And then at some point you'll suddenly think, actually, this is like so and so, this is like something that somebody read or somebody wrote years ago or whatever. The hardest thing for me, because I do like Doctor Who work and stuff, is coming up with an original Doctor Who idea, because there's so much out. There's like 60 years of TV, 60 years of books, 60 years of audio dramas, and just coming up with something that feels new and fresh in that world is so hard.
I can't even imagine, because I'll admit I don't watch Doctor Who, but I know that there's decades of plots and ideas and creatures and things, and then you've got like other shows that are similar that way, where they're dealing with individual things as well. I can't imagine trying to come up with something new for Doctor Who.
It's not easy, to be honest. It's harder coming up with Doctor Who ideas than it is coming up with just general ideas, because whatever I always think, and it can be something like you think, yeah, that's like that 1968 story, But the thing is, there are so many huge fans of Doctor Who that even if it's a story that's buried way, way back in the archives, all the fans will know it. It won't be something that you'll think, nobody will remember that, because they do. They will know all the stories. So.
I mostly only watch horror stuff. I'm quite close-minded in that way, but I've seen some scenes from Doctor Who, because anytime that anything scary happens, my brother's like, you have to see this episode or this scene or something. So I have been scared by Doctor Who a few times.
Yeah.
Creepy things.
This person scared me, so it's about the thing that led me into horror, really. So.
Oh yeah. I used to get scared of there was an episode of Red Dwarf that scared me.
Really? All right.
It was those like scary cyborg things that had gone insane, and I was scared of a Star Trek Next Gen episode as well when I was a kid. I've told people about this episode since, and no one knows what I'm talking about, but everyone for some reason is turning into animals of some kind for some reason. And I just remember Deanna being like a frog-like thing, and I just it scarred me for. I might have just dreamt it, but it scarred me for life. The last thing I wanted to ask you is about what are the perks, or are there perks over everything else of writing tie-ins or novelizations?
I mean, it depends what it is, obviously. sometimes I mean, Doctor Who is great for me because it's like, I feel like I'm going back to my roots, you know? Once I have come up with the idea, which is the hardest thing. But writing, I recently wrote the novelization of Wild Blue Yonder, which was a story, a TV episode where David Tennant came back for 3 stories. And oh, that was just a dream, because I grew up reading those Target and Doctor Who novelizations. They were like my bread and butter when I was a kid. So to actually then write one was just a dream come true. Sometimes it's difficult. I mean, things like movie novelizations are, you get the script, you get thing given to you, so it's just a case of translating that into prose. The kind of disadvantages of that is that sometimes you will be like 3/4 of the way through and they'll say, oh, we've had a script meeting and the script's all has changed, so we're sending you the new script. And it's like, okay, great. You know, you still have the same deadline, but you've got to incorporate the new script and stuff. Sometimes it's kind of flying by the seat of your pants type writing. And to give you an example, I was asked by Titan to write a Spartacus novel, or asked if I would like to write a Spartacus novel. And, you know, being a professional writer, you try not to say no, you try to say yes and then worry about things. So I got this call on, it was a Friday afternoon. Would I like to write a novel based on the Spartacus TV series? And the reason they asked me was because the original, they'd asked another writer who was known for writing historical fiction. So he, you know, it was very much in his kind of purview. But he'd fallen ill and he couldn't finish it. But he kind of kept delaying telling them that he was ill because he kept thinking he was going to be able to write it. And then he got to the stage, like a critical stage, literally 4 weeks before the deadline, where he said to them, I'm really sorry, but I'm ill and I can't write this book. And all I've done is written a very sketchy kind of, he had the title, he'd written a very sketchy sort of plot line, literally like half a page. And he'd done the first scene of about 2 pages. That's all he'd done. And he said, I'm just not going to be able to do it because I'm going to be going in for treatment and stuff. And I just know that I'm not going to be able to do it. So they called me and said, okay, here's the situation. Can you write this book? It's based on Spartacus TV series. We need it in 4 weeks. We have a title. We have a very, very sketchy plot line. I was like, I said, I've never seen the series. I don't know, you know, I said, I know obviously Spartacus, the gladiator story and things, but I've never seen the series, don't know any of the characters. And they said, oh, it's okay. We'll courier you the entire series tomorrow. We'll get somebody to deliver all the DVDs to you and you can sit and watch it. So literally, so I said yes, stupid maybe. So I said yes, and then put the phone down and panicked and thought, how the hell am I going to do this? And the next morning, sure enough, a guy turns up on a motorbike with a big box full of DVDs, sat and watched the DVDs all weekend, making tons of notes. And then on the Monday, I came up, looked at the sketchy storyline, beefed it all out as much as I could, made a proper plot line, sent it in to them and said, is this okay? And they said, yeah, just go for it. We just need the book, just go for it. And then I had to write the book. And I was like just Googling stuff and Wikipediaing stuff as I went, because I sort of thought things like, because it's set in a gladiatorial school on top of a mountain, and I was like, how the hell did they get food and drink up a mountain in ancient Rome, you know, for like 50 gladiators? How would they do that? How would that happen? And what would the drainage be like? And, you know, just all these sort of practical things that occurred to me, and I just had to kind of research on the hoof, whilst at the same time trying to write like 3,500 words a day to keep up with because I had to write an 80,000 word book in 4 weeks.
That's crazy. Even if you do have you know, source material to work off, you still have to get all those words down and everything. I think people don't realize the importance of research and just knowing things, like the things, because even if they're not in the book, it's so obvious when an author hasn't researched like a location or something, for example, and because you'll notice that things don't feel right, even if they would have just been like tiny little details that actually make it in. I've never thought about how you get
so I have
drink
done
up a mountain.
like 2 or 3 times now where I've literally done a book in like 4 weeks, having not known it about the source material beforehand. And so far it's always worked out fine. It's always been fine, and quite often the books are quite well reviewed even when they come out. It's not like, oh, this is an absolute shambles, you know. It's they've always been quite solidly reviewed. So it kind of gives you that confidence, though, you know, when you've got to think, I can do this, I can turn my hand to this, I can, you know, in a crisis, just do that focusing thing and just bang it out.
Oh yeah, I feel like if I got the opportunity to write a tie-in for something I'm a fan of, especially, I would do nothing else until it was done.
So I could spend the rest of my career writing Doctor Who novelizations of episodes that, you know, haven't been novelized. I would be very happy doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to have a dream of writing Walking Dead tie-ins.
Yeah.
But they do have a writer for that. James was writing with Rob Kirkwood for a bit, but they were releasing those little webisodes, like 10-minute little side stories for a while, and I met Greg Nicotero at a Walking Dead convention once, and I was like, oh, I have these ideas for this. And he was like, well, when we come next year, bring some stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll read it on the plane. And I was like, yay! Never happened again, that convention in the UK.
Yeah, I've been up for quite a few tie-in jobs that I didn't get, usually because the books weren't selling well enough, and they kind of stopped, you know, bringing out though. So I was once up for possibly doing an X-Files novel, and I was excited about that because I knew Charles L. Grant, who wrote quite a few of the early ones, and he put my name forward. I was up for doing a Being Human novel. I was up for doing a Primeval, the dinosaur series. Up for one of those. And each time it was because they'd brought out an initial batch of books and they hadn't sold that well, and so they just kind of knocked it on the head and didn't keep the series going. And I would really have loved, there was oh God, what was it called? Penny Dreadful. There's a series called Penny Dreadful. And I was one of the writers who was supposed to be writing like tie-in books for that. And we couldn't get the creator to agree to tie-in books. He was kind of a bit too sort of precious about it. He didn't want other people dealing with his situations and his characters and stuff. So I was waiting for ages, thinking, oh, I can't, you know, I'm so excited about writing a Penny Dreadful.
Yeah, I liked Penny Dreadful.
So yeah.
Well, that's a shame. I feel like that's not to disparage that person at all, but that feels silly to me, because if people fund the books first, then that's probably just going to help sell everything else too, because people like to collect things. So.
I guess if you've come up with like a concept for a series and you've come up with other characters and stuff, you must feel a little bit sort of, oh, it's mine, it's my baby, I don't want people to spoil it and things. But then it would have had, you know, the approval on each thing that came out. So
I think people worry about their work being sort of like not feeling like their work if other people are at the helm. But if it's people who are fans of the thing, they're probably gonna do a good job.
Yeah.
I wrote this play. It was basically a zombie sitcom, just like one set piece, and I was asked if I wanted to co-direct it, and I was like, oh, I don't know, I'm not a director, but I would love to sit in on rehearsals and just see, because I've never seen anything that I've written before staged like that. And I think that initially the performers were a bit like, all right, just sit in there, because sometimes they'd say a line and it just wouldn't sound right, and then they'd be like, do you mind if we, and I was like, no. And some of the funniest things that came out of that were things that the actors thought of on the fly as they were going. So I ended up like adapting what I'd already written to like incorporate some of this. So I like collaborations and stuff. That,
I mean, it's interesting doing that, because I've written a few Doctor Who audio dramas, and I'd never written any scripts before, never done anything. And they got in touch with me, a company called Big Finish who do them. Asked if I'd like to write one, and I said but I've never written a script before. I said I'd love to do one, but I've never. And they just said it's okay, we'll kind of ease you through the process. And I've done quite a lot of script work now. But the first one I did, I went down for the recording of it, and of course it was Sylvester McCoy as the Doctor and his companion, so it was like professional actors. and it was about Howard Carter, then meeting Howard Carter, the Egyptologist who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb and stuff. And I said, so I went and said, so who have you got to play Howard Carter? And it was Benedict Cumberbatch that got him to play Howard Carter. He wasn't like super famous then, but he was well known, you know. And it was just before he got the Sherlock gig, basically. And so it was just amazing hearing your words brought to life by an actor of that caliber.
Yeah,
it's made your scene 10 times better than it was. But there was also that thing where occasional lines just sounded clunky when people said them.
Yeah.
But luckily, because I was there, I said, "Oh, can I just change that? Or can maybe if the actor says this instead?" And it was a very kind of organic, collaborative sort of process where, you know, I was there, could talk to the actors in the sound booth and said, maybe if you just say that instead and just don't say the whole clunky stuff. And it usually sounded a lot better. But yeah, it's an interesting process.
Yeah, it's so weird when other people are letting on your work to do something creative with it and you're seeing it in real time. I think that script experience helped me with my dialogue in my short stories and stuff, because I didn't realize that I was really bad at writing dialogue before. And obviously a play is mostly dialogue, and it wasn't really what they were saying. It was like some of the turns of phrase I was putting in there, and I was like, oh god, a 22-year-old would actually never say that phrase. Like, it's like, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, all learning experiences, but it is fun to see other people enjoying and interpreting your stuff as well. So
dialogue in script work is very exposing as well, because when actors actually say it and it sounds like not right, you can get away with it a bit more in prose sometimes, whereas in script, you know, script form, it has to be very kind of lean and natural and sound like proper conversation and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's even harder if you're trying to write a dramatic scene to not into melodrama accidentally. Because it does sound different to when you read it. Like, oh, this is fine, and then someone says it, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite piece of your own work?
Ooh, good question. I think I'm always kind of the opinion that the thing I've written, the most recent thing, I always tend to like a lot more. I mean, I look back on things that I feel have stood the test of time. I still really like That Which Stands Outside. I still feel, you know, that it works well. I still like my Obsidian Heart trilogy, which I did for Titan, which is a kind of mixture of horror, time travel-y fantasy, and kind of historical fiction, and also crime. It's got lots of different elements. And it took a lot of working out because it was all time travel stuff. I'm still very pleased with that. There are a couple of things I wrote. There's something called, God, I'm going to forget the name of it. Oh, I wrote a novella called Albion Fae, which I still think works really well. And I wrote another kind of novella or short novel called It Sustains, which I'm still really pleased with. And then I'm quite fond of my first novel, Toady, even though I wrote it when I was like between the ages of 21 and 24. So it's got a certain amount of naivety to it, but I'm still kind of fond of a lot of bits of it. I still think some of it it's gotten a kind of a nice energy to it, I think, and a lot of people still really like that book. So I'm kind of fond of it for that reason.
I've seen people talking about that recently, actually. So
people do. People still keep discovering it, and there are certain people who just they say it's their favorite novel of all time, which is such a massive compliment, you know. But there's a big kind of fantasy section towards the end, or in the second half of the book. It goes into a very fantastical kind of realm, and I think now if I wrote that again, I would kind of tone that all down. I'm not sure how much of that works now. I was just letting my imagination just explode. I think at the time, because I was so young, and I thought this might be the only thing I ever get published, so I'll just throw every single idea I've ever come up with into this.
Well, I think it worked for you quite well. Well, so for people who have never read anything by Mark, I think start on the most recent things and then go backwards. I always love doing that when I find find writers I haven't read before, and then it turns out that they have a massive catalogue of things like you do, Mark.
Yeah.
It's going to keep me busy for years. I'm trying to finish up all my Tim Leben books, and now I've got all of your back catalogue on there as well. It's going to take me years probably. I will put the links for all of Mark's information in the description for anyone that wants to check out your work, Mark, and I'll put your website link and everything on there as well. And yeah, once again, as recent projects go, I just have to just one last time recommend wholeheartedly both of these pieces of work are just some of my favorite reading from last year. Is there anything for anyone who hasn't read you before, Mark? Do you think that there's a good starting place for people?
Yeah, like you say, start with the most recent book, maybe. Maybe if you want to commit to 3 books, read the Obsidian Heart trilogy. Or if you want to start at the beginning, I'm quite happy for people to read Toady. I am one of these writers though who I always feel when somebody says they're reading one of my old books, my immediate response is I feel like I have to apologize for it. Also, just bear in mind that so and so and so and so. So yeah, I would say kind of start with those. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you once again for doing this, Mark. This has just been wonderful for me because I'm really loving your work at the moment. So it's been great to have you on, and we're going to wish everyone a nice day and sign off with our usual bleat.